Okay, can you see this?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so Simon, Wifeng, and I are the co-founders of a non-profit organization called Onaya Science. So this talk is going to be a bit of an overview of the non-profit, our projects, and yeah, kind of where we're at the moment with two primary things that we're working on. And we'll give you a bit of a background information on the previous studies that we've done as well and some of the findings. Just a little overview. So a introduction about the non-profit entity. Then we're going to talk to you a little bit about ayahuasca, what it is, how the ceremonies look where we conduct our experiments. There's many different types of ayahuasca, but we're going to talk about specifically the Shipibo lineage and the cosmology that surrounds that. This ties into set and setting. I'm sure it's a concept that many of you guys know. If you've got an interest in PsyCare, I'm sure you're pretty well versed with it. But the therapeutic outcomes and how it relates to people's state of mind and the framework that we're in, and obviously how that ties into the Shipibo setting. Then we're going to give you a little overview of the research, as I mentioned, the ongoing projects, and then we'll talk to you a little bit about some ethical considerations of ayahuasca and also of the research.
And there'll be
So
lots of
nice.
time for questions at the end.
Yeah, I think we've got about half an hour. So yeah, should be plenty of time. So Onaya Science. Yeah, so we're a non-profit that's been focusing on exploring primarily ayahuasca. But as a result of that, it's stemmed out into the practices that surround ayahuasca ceremonies. So initially, when I first went out there, I thought I was setting up an experiment to look at the ceremonies and the pharmacology of ayahuasca. We very quickly realized that the paradigm is much, much bigger than ayahuasca. And a lot of the projects are looking at kind of the spiritual elements of it now, the role of music, which Wifeng will talk to you a little bit about further on, and how the ceremonies are actually conducted with a shaman or curandero, and all of the other elements that play into the therapeutic outcomes. So Onaya Science was designed to find the intersection between modern medicine and traditional curanderismo, which is another word for Shipibo curanderismo, is like another word for shamanism of the Amazon. And we imagine a world where the two paradigms come together and we integrate modern medicine into the traditional practices of people that have been using these plants for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And the research is designed to investigate and see where the overlaps and the parallels are. With the organization, we hope that the traditions are respected and that we try and offer as much back to the indigenous practitioners as possible. So all of our studies are conducted in as much of a reciprocal manner as possible. And the word Onaya is a Shipibo word, and it means one who knows, or healer, or someone that carries wisdom. So this is the core team. As Casper mentioned, there's Simon. Simon was meant to be in this talk as well, but he's actually helping facilitate a retreat in Portugal at the moment. Simon's been training in curanderismo, so he's going to be helping out, singing in ceremonies and giving the plant medicine interventions. Myself, Don Rono is one of the curanderos that we work with. We actually work with a lineage of three brothers and other family members, but Don Rono is the one that we work with the most. And yeah, Wifeng, who's also in the call. These are our current collaborators at the bottom. And yeah, we've linked to a few different universities and we've got their labs testing different aspects of the current studies that we're working on, which we'll talk you through in a little bit. Yeah, this is the broader team. Casper is also on there. He's been helping us out with social media, and he came out as a research assistant as well. And then the other guys on here are heads of each of the kind of sub elements of each of the studies that we've got going on at the moment. So Georgia is a metabolomics and microbiome specialist. Ollie on the right is a neuroscientist, so she's been heading up all of the EEG elements of the study. Nathan is a geneticist, so he's been dealing with all of the biological samples at UCL, and then Max is the research assistant coordinator. So, as I mentioned before, Onaya Science is trying to bring together the two worlds, really, traditional medicine and what we accept as modern conventional medicine in the West. So, just a little bit of background, and we realized this very quickly from spending time in the jungle. Um, so, the first time I did a retreat, I came out of it thinking this is real medicine. The things that I saw were profound, to be honest. So, yeah, only in recent history have humans used pharmaceutical drugs. And this was around the early 1800s when the first pharmaceutical was patented and rolled out. While pharmaceuticals are used for many conditions, modern science has often disregarded the ancient wisdom and traditional practices that humans have followed for thousands of years. So all of our ancestors used plants for medicine at the end of the day. We are living amidst a global mental health crisis. It's commonly accepted that that's the case from pretty much any therapeutic practitioner that works in modern medicine. And a few little stats that there's 300 million people suffering from depression at the moment. It's about 5% of adults. One third of these did not respond to three antidepressants, so they're classed as treatment resistant. So we don't really have any legitimate effective treatments in psychiatry at the moment. And the NICE recommended CBT, which is the go-to for mental health like, conditions within the UK, so anxiety and depression are normally referred for CBT, is shown to be only about 50% effective. So evidently something needs to shift. And there's growing empirical data which suggests profound psychological, emotional, and physical and physical therapeutic potential from ayahuasca and associated plant medicines. And much of this, from the data and from what we've observed, seems to surpass many of the modern treatments. So Weifeng's going to talk you through a little bit about what ayahuasca is.
Thank you so much, Nige. Yes. So stripping back a little bit for those who might not be so familiar, what is ayahuasca? Ayahuasca means a lot of different things to different people, but at the core of it, it's a tea and a concoction. And for some people, it might involve a lot of sacraments. It might involve a whole tradition around it, the ceremony around it, but it's essentially a psychedelic brew that's made of two basic plants. And that's the Banisteriopsis caapi, or the ayahuasca vine, which contains the beta carbolines and the MAOIs, and also the Psychotria viridis, or it's called the chacruna from the places where we work, and that contains the DMT. And they really need to work together and brew together, and they're kind of just boiled together in a bowl over and over again, and for days sometimes, until they get to this kind of really thick brown, really disgusting and stinky kind of tasting drink. Much worse than like the Chinese medicines I grew up with is really bad. And the reason why the ayahuasca vine is used together with the Psychotria viridis and the DMT is because there are monoamine oxidase, these enzymes in our bodies that break down the DMT, and by having in the inhibitors alongside with the DMT, when we take it orally, it renders it orally active, and is really famous for a lot of properties that are outlined here, like the purgative effects, alongside the kind of visionary, introspective, and have been used for connection with the divine. The word ayahuasca itself comes from the old Quechua language, which means the vine or the rope of the dead. And traditionally has been used, besides a sacrament in the medicine, also kind of like a tool to help one connect with nature, to help connect with plants, for spiritual development, for warfare and hunting. There's a lot of people can use it for with ill intent also, and that kind of speaks more to the ethics of using ayahuasca, which we'll go on to more later. But now it's kind of moving on to the whole notion of ayahuasca tourism, where it's become so popular that more and more Westerners are now traveling to South America or different places in the world to engage in ayahuasca ceremonies, and now it's become yeah. It's become very popular. We'll kind of speak to the pros and cons of that as we go. Can I get the next slide, please? So as we were mentioning before, the set and setting, like with any psychedelic, we know that it is heavily impacted by the one's mindset in the environmental setting and internal setting in which you engage with the psychedelic. And these things tend to mediate your experience and can draw out the therapeutic potential if used in the correct way, but then in an incorrect way can at worst lead to re-traumatization and can have some negative impacts on people. And one of the reasons why Onaya and myself are, as a psychologist, one of my most interested parts of studying ayahuasca is the rich cultural context that's around it and the ceremonies, the rituals, the social safeguards, and all of the things that these traditional indigenous people have used lineages to develop over time. And they are really the experts of this kind of set and setting, and some of the safeguards that we've been talking about. And these we'll go out into that a little bit more as we kind of outline yeah, what the ceremony looks like for the research that we've been conducting. And the next slide, please. So we have, excuse me, I've been I've been down with a little bit of a thing in my throat, so excuse me if I'm a bit horsey. So Shipibo cosmology, I think is really important to talk a little bit around the framework in which we have been conducting this research in the indigenous paradigm, because we often go in there with this very scientific Western kind of worldview. I know I have, it's kind of been part of my training, and same with the others in the group. But then it's a very different kind of approach and lens at which the indigenous people use to see the way they work with ayahuasca and spirituality and energetic moving. And it's very core, actually very one that I resonate with a lot. And within Shipibo cosmology, they're largely collectivist in culture, so they believe in the interconnectedness of all things, and people, but also within internal systems, to wider systems, our connections to plants, to the nature around us, to the universe at large. And ayahuasca is one part of this really, well, is one part of the Amazon jungle, which is one of the largest hospital of plants in the world. And because of the interconnectedness of all things, the Shipibos believe in this innate capacity for healing, and how if we can heal our environment, heal our bodies, we can, by extension, impact our spiritual health, our mental health. And they often talk about trauma and healing psychological wounds like a cut, where, for example, if you are able to clean it and protect it, it will, like a wound, physically heal. And I believe the origins of the word trauma is actually wound from the ancient Greek. And yeah, so they see the mind, body, spirit, and your community, the relationships, the people that you interact with as a very holistic system, which we are now seeing more and more in science, as well as more and more evidence to point to the interconnectedness of all things. Can you, next
Yeah.
slide, please?
Yeah, I just want to quickly add on this slide as well, that I was blown away with the level of structure that's actually evident in the Shipibo cosmology. They have, well, the lineage that we work with, they have what they call master plants, and each of these are kind of archetypal energies, and you can diet them based on what it is that you might need at that point in time. For example, if you've got poor boundaries, you can diet a plant called chiwachaki, and it will strengthen your boundaries and your ability to be more assertive. So in a way, you can kind of, with plants, you can seemingly customize your psyche or your ability to function. And yeah, just as Wifeng mentioned briefly there, the ayahuasca is kind of seen as a diagnostic tool. It's not really seen as the go-to healer of Shipibo Kronderismo. It's used in ceremony to be able to diagnose and then to prescribe other plants.
And also Makura, right, for lazy people.
Yeah.
which is this like really wasabi tasting and smelling kind of juice from this plant that you snort, and it kind of just burns your nose for ages, and they give it to the lazy people in the village. Um, yeah, it's very interesting. I always find that kind of, yeah, it's this idea that every plant kind of like animals and humans will have their kind of like properties, like things that they're good at, things that they're not so good at, and they will interact with humans in certain ways, and certain ones work much better with humans than others, and these become the master plants and the teacher plants. Um, yeah, very interesting perspective on our connections with nature. Definitely, yeah, it's definitely kind of very it takes a while to kind of get my head around, but it makes a lot of sense if we really think about it. Um, so moving on to the therapeutic potential. So with uh, by extension also with as with other psychedelics, and what we're seeing is that kind of just like this positive improvements in a lot of classic kind of psychological domains like anxiety, depression, levels of acceptance, mindfulness, compassion. And I think one thing that kind of like differentiates it a little bit more is this ability to kind of like tap into the ability to kind of relive experiences, be transported back, and you always get these anecdotal reports of people having experiences where they are, yeah, maybe like reliving traumas or even reliving past lives, and these are the things that could become a bit harder to measure with science, but qualitatively is one thing that people report, and that's also part of the reason why we've honed a lot of our research into the use of ayahuasca for trauma and trauma-related conditions like PTSD, childhood trauma, complex trauma. There's a lot of overlapping evidence with the way ayahuasca works compared to evidence-based practices in psychology. So, for example, in these kind of mindfulness-based therapies, exposure-based therapies, ACT, acceptance commitment therapy, working by that ability to relax beliefs in kind of like more ruminative states, and expand that capacity for compassion towards yourself, to others, and to the world, and therefore, by extension, improve your relationship with yourself and other people, and your mental health um, improvements as well. So also with the anecdotal reports, this is an area that's very interesting, I think, like with how it can help physical health as well. Like one thing that differentiates ayahuasca with a lot of other classical psychedelics is this component of the purge and the body clean that comes with it, the throwing up and this body detox, um, which is associated with some maybe like higher dose psilocybin sometimes, and then also with iboga, but more classically with ayahuasca. And one thing we're looking at now in the study, for example, is how it can help with the gut and the gut health and the gut microbiome with conditions that are related as well, like IBS and cancer. Which some rat studies have kind of shown some improvements for with cell division, for example. Um, Passing
So
it back to Nige.
yeah. So it's general practice. This is kind of more of an addition since Westerners have started going in and drinking ayahuasca in traditional settings where there is a preparation period. I think the reality of this is that a lot of people from more developed worlds have a lot more toxins in them. There's a lot more chemicals in the water supplies. We're consuming things that are packaged in plastic. We're not really exposed to clean eating in general. So all of our sample groups that we've been testing have had this typically a 2 week preparation period. But this seems to be pretty much across the board with these ayahuasca retreat centers that are opening up. This involves a number of dietary restrictions. Many of you may have already drank ayahuasca, so you might know some of these, but it typically includes stripping everything back. No sugar, no salt, no caffeine, no oil, no spices, no sex as part of it, no masturbation, and basically anything that triggers a dopamine response in the body is kind of dampened down for a period of minimum around 2 weeks. Um, on top of this, people are advised to come off medications, particularly things like SSRIs. There has been some research into contraindications of that potentially causing serotonin syndrome, which can be quite dangerous. And then there's also numerous effort made to psychological preparation. So thinking about the types of things that you're wanting to work on and taking that into ceremony. Most centers, or any good center, will offer some kind of preparation guidelines where they'll help people with getting themselves ready to take the plunge. But there's also obviously a lot of clandestine ayahuasca pseudo shamans out there, so it can be quite a sketchy endeavor. But yeah, the idea is basically to prepare your body and mind as much as possible to be able to absorb the ayahuasca and to be able to go as deep as possible into your subconscious. So the ceremonies, they're typically conducted in a maloka. This is kind of more of a modern variation on how ayahuasca ceremonies are conducted. And again, it's because of the ayahuasca tourism that's starting to, well, has started, is already snowballed, to be honest. They're catering for Westerners more and more, basically. They've got mosquito nets, and a lot of the ceremonies with some indigenous communities are still done outside in the middle of the dark. But with the Shipibo family that we're working with at the moment, it's conducted in this kind of room here. So it's a circular structure, mattresses facing inwards, and the shaman or curandero normally sits somewhere in the middle. And you will drink the brew. It will kick in about an hour, and then the curandero typically sings for about 4 or 5 hours. The center that we work at as well encourages every participant to sing in ceremony themselves as well. This is not traditional practice by any means. Again, this is kind of a neo-shamanic evolution of how ayahuasca ceremonies are being done. But either way, there's typically singing throughout the whole ceremony, and that's pretty much the only thing that guides you. In pitch black, you're not allowed to touch anybody. You're advised not to speak to anybody unless absolutely necessary. And the idea is to let the icaros, which Wi-Fi will talk to you about a little bit more, guide the experience and go inward as much as possible.
Thank you. Yeah, the icaros, the songs, the chanting, and the medicine kind of guides essentially is the word icaro originally just means kind of like a medicine tool, but now it's been pretty much specifically assigned to the singing that's kind of been that runs throughout the ceremony. Music really plays a critical role in the tradition as well, and the icaros are they're kind of freestyled on the spot. They're not kind of pre-planned, they're not written, and they are dynamically tailored for what is happening within either an individual or the group as a whole in the ceremony. And they are there to help with lots of different things. And when I say that, and I really mean it in a very kind of clinical way, they're quite surgical almost and prescriptive in their use. Icaros can have very different melodies. There's different rhythms, different kind of like timbres, loudness and softness with the lyrics and the intentions. And they have very specific ones for very specific ailments. So, for example, for protection, for opening up the space, for connecting with family, for connecting with the plants that they're working with, for the icaros for women going on their periods. It can get very specific. And it's really there to provide a container, like a sonic container, to help the person go through what they need to go through. And it will tend to start with like an arch and with a peak, start kind of like quiet with a peak in the middle that kind of comes towards the end. And it will also provide the container for, say, diagnostic users, for prognosis, for coming up with a care plan for people as well. There's a lot of, the use of music is becoming more and more recognized as well. But I think the Shipibos are quite revered even in the ayahuasca traditions to have the most kind of potent use of music and the most kind of studied. So even say like the Aonawa and Incan tribes will kind of bring in Shipibos icaros to their ceremonies also. And yeah, the use of music is becoming more and more well researched, to be kind of really important in the use of psychedelics. So, for example, we're seeing that music can elicit greater potential therapeutically than dosage itself, and then also it kind of has a similar way of activating the brain and bringing emotional content to the forefront and diminishing that kind of intellectual, logical thinking as well. And is actually a very good way for people to listen to the music that they were listening to in ceremony during the integration to help them kind of tap back into some of those teachings, some of those lessons that they learned within the ceremony as well. Well, just a quick word on this image here. So on the left here is the kind of like kymatics. So when certain frequencies make certain patterns, or when you put kind of like fine sand on a speaker, for example, and then on the right is one of the Shipibo's patterns. The Shipibo patterns and these the way they interweave these is kind of how they always say that this is like the sheet music for the icaros, and they tap into specific frequencies from the visions that they see within the ayahuasca ceremonies, and then the different patterns will represent different plants. For example, one's for ayahuasca, one's for marusa, chuachaki, we've spoken about. So yeah, it's a very kind of visionary process.
Mm. Yeah, and on top of that, when they're doing the diagnostics of individuals, they will say that they can see the energetic form in this kind of mandala-like moving tapestry of energy. And they supposedly can see blockages in people's energetic forms. And as Weifeng mentioned, they'll tailor the songs that they're singing to disrupt this energetic blockage and to restructure it, which is very interesting when we're talking about psychedelic therapy and we're trying to standardize playlists to be listened to whilst people are taking psilocybin or LSD or whatever it may be. It's neglecting this whole dynamic element, which in the Shipibo framework seems to be pretty fundamental.
Takes a lifetime of training, though. There's such an expertise in it. Okay, and yeah, community support and integration for yeah, a lot of the times when the shamans are using the icaros is helping them to connect with plants, and I think that kind of comes through a lot of the healing, and they kind of like yeah, they use it to energetically connect with these plant friends. But for a lot of us who essentially don't spend all our time hanging out with plants, actually the community aspect plays a really big part of the therapeutic response that we see. And a lot of people do share that as well, that they are really yeah, they get a lot of the out of spending time in the ceremony, being in a group and with a community, and also the sharing circles that follow the ceremony. So after each ceremony, the next day, before is that before or after breakfast? I can't remember. There is a sharing circle essentially where they would sit in a circle and one by one talk about their experiences. And a lot of practitioners say that the ceremony isn't over until the sharing circle is over. And this can really help facilitate the meaning making process, which can be quite ineffable or a lot has happened, and it can be quite, ceremonies can get very difficult, but to have that emotional support and to hear the diverse perspectives of the people around you can be very therapeutic. And also, this will extend to after the retreat. So, for example, we see a lot of people in our research, when they go to ayahuasca retreats together, they often go on to become friends for life, and they stay connected. And especially where we see kind of like good therapeutic outcomes, that tends to be the case. Not always, but and yeah, the therapeutic alliance as well as something, that's been highly well researched as a significant indicator of positive change, even in Western practices and therapy, where the therapeutic alliance between the clients and the therapist can really improve the outcomes. And that's definitely something that the curanderos and the shamans say, like, you need to have faith kind of in me, and you need to kind of like trust me, and that trust becomes a big part of the healing process of being able to let yourself go to to be vulnerable in this space as well. Yeah. Can I get the next slide, please? Oh, I think it's now gone back to you.
Yeah. So this is the location where we've been collecting the majority of the data. It's in the Ayahuasca National Reserve. It's about 2 hours away from Iquitos, which is the nearest city. Iquitos is known as one of the gateways to the Amazon. It's only accessible by boat or plane. There's no roads, and it sits right on the edge of the National Reserve. We have to get a boat about 1 hour up the river after going on a dirt road, and then you're in the middle of the National Reserve, which is where the research centre and the indigenous community are based. And that's in the Mashana community. I've just noticed Javi's in the call as well as one of our research assistants, so he was very recently there. Okay, so this is an overview of our research to date. So I'm going to quickly talk you through chronologically how we ended up with Onaya Science. So Simon and I both practiced in conventional mental health treatments. So Simon was trained as a psychiatrist. I studied psychopharmacology, and we became quite skeptical of the treatments we were offering. Simon actually burnt out working at one of the psychiatric units in London, and took a year out to explore alternative treatments. He went to Uganda and worked with child soldiers, and then he ended up in the Amazon. And during this time, he did 6 ceremonies, called me up, basically was like, Nige, you need to really seriously come and check this stuff out. We'd been going to psychedelic conferences at the time and trying to see where the gaps in the research were. We then, 6 months after Simon first went there, we went and designed a pretty basic study, just looking at the effects of ayahuasca on personality. So we used the 5-factor model. I don't know if you guys are aware of it, but it breaks personality down to 5 primary traits. I had seen that a psilocybin study had been done at Johns Hopkins in the US that showed that single high dose of psilocybin seemingly changed personality significantly on a couple of these different traits long term from 1 dose. So we set out to replicate that study. The ironic thing is, me, Simon, and I imagine quite a few people in the team never actually anticipated on being scientific researchers. We kind of just set out to conduct some data and get involved in the psychedelic research circles. We found that there were significant changes in personality, particularly in the trait of neuroticism. So we showed around about a 50% reduction across the board in healthy participants on their neuroticism scores. Now, neuroticism is generally associated with conditions known as affective disorders. So things like anxiety, depression, OCD, these kind of things. Like if you score highly on neuroticism, then quite often it's accompanied with those kind of conditions. So this first publication implied that there was potentially some therapeutic potential to ayahuasca. I mean, the traditional practitioners know damn well, but from a scientific point of view, there hadn't been any data conducted of this nature at the time. We presented this at conferences. This then led to the next study, which was actually funded by the Medical Research Council UK, which was nice to have the work validated and to be supported by what is effectively the British government, which led to the ceremonial ayahuasca in Amazonian retreats, mental health and epigenetic outcomes from a 6-month naturalistic study. And this study was looking at the ability of ayahuasca to reprocess childhood memories or childhood trauma. And we also took biological samples in this one in the form of saliva, and we were looking at prospective changes in the genome, which we did actually find some preliminary significant changes to sigma-1, which is a neuromodulator. It's been linked to trauma. As a result of those previous publications, we've now partnered up with Heroic Hearts. It's a military veteran charity, and we've been sending people to the Amazon, or we haven't been, but Heroic Hearts have been sending people to the Amazon, but we've been conducting scientific research on these veterans, which we'll talk you through a little bit more as the presentation goes on. But yeah, as a result of those rounds of data collection, we've had a few splinter projects and publications come out of it. All of our publications, and there's some podcasts and media, is all on our website. So if any of you guys are interested, check out www.onaya.science. And everything's open source on there, and all of our publications were done in open source journals. So you should be able to access the full publications. So yeah, as I mentioned, we're currently working with Heroic Hearts. We got ethics approved for this at the start of 2023, and we've tested 45 or 46 military veterans now. We conducted the pilot study throughout 2023, and we've rounded off that data now. We're in the process of writing it up and trying to get it published at the moment. Yeah, it's a mixed methods observational study into the effects of legal ayahuasca retreats on military veterans. And all of this, again, is conducted in the Alapuaya Mashano National Reserve in a traditional setting. So yeah. Oh yeah, Wifeng, you can go on this one.
Yeah, it's been really great working with Heroic Hearts, and I think yeah, just to highlight here, yeah, Heroic Hearts are a charity. They're an organization that kind of like, yeah, facilitates veterans with PTSD to access alternative treatments where traditional treatment has failed them in the past. And they have, you know, they're US based primarily, but they are now kind of like splinter factions in Canada, in the UK, in Australia. And we have been, yeah, working towards getting, yeah, veterans from different parts of the world to sit together in ceremony, which is quite exciting.
It
And
snowballed quick.
yeah, uh, especially the UK. Actually, I'm quite keen to see where like the more UK vets kind of come through as well. So yeah, like Nige said, currently the sample's at around 45. Our ethics is kind of based on how many numbers we need for the analyses we need to do towards the end. So it's like a 5-year project, and we aim to collect 205 people over the next few years. And yeah, it's basically we run around two to 3 to 4 retreats, depending on circumstances, a year, around 10 people a retreat. Right now, we've analyzed around 10 people, and I'll be sharing some of that preliminary data with you now. And this is it's a mixed method study, including the multidisciplinary team we introduced at the start, looking at psychological elements like psychometry and like cognitive neuroscience, so looking at how different levels of cognition, like memory and attention, are changing as after ayahuasca use in ceremony. Looking at EEG neuroimaging, the microbiome, the metabolomics, and also genetics. We've just recently started getting bloods as well, so hopefully we'll be yeah, I'm quite excited to see that data as well, and hopefully we'll have something better to share in terms of outcomes in the future.
Yeah, in the next maybe 4 months, we should have the pilot study publication ready to go. So if anyone's interested, feel free to contact either me or Wifeng, and we'll get that sent over.
Just to kind of give you like a bit of an overview of what we've kind of found so far. So we are using kind of diagnostic measures that are used clinically for PTSD, looking at areas of intrusion, avoidance, negative mood, cognitions, and reactivity, the core kind of domains of PTSD. And what we are seeing is that everyone going into the study has a diagnosed PTSD. We recently started taking people with traumatic brain injury also. But the exclusion criteria are mainly around psychosis, spectrum disorders, bipolar, schizophrenia, for example. And for those who come into the study, for the 10 we've analyzed, everyone is no longer meeting the diagnosis for PTSD post-retreat. We've just collected the 6-month follow-up data that is pending on populating that database and analyzing it. I've got my fingers crossed for positive outcomes on the long term, but yeah, just to show you what we've done so far. Next slide, please.
Yeah, and as a side note, this is on 10-day retreats. So yeah, it's pretty amazing, really, that participants aren't meeting the PTSD criteria after a 10-day period. And we're going to be doing long-term follow-ups, 3 and 6. Are we doing 3 months for this one again, my phone? Was it 6 months on this one?
We've got 6 months for this.
Yeah, 6 months. Yeah.
And I think yeah, just to kind of like put some perspective on these numbers, a lot of these people when they come into the jungle, it can be really quite debilitating when we first see them. They are really kind of struggling socially, struggling in lots of areas of their lives, have addiction issues, for example. And yeah. Interestingly, actually, one interesting thing regarding the trauma is like we set up this study hoping that we would help veterans with their war traumas and combat traumas. But actually, one thing that really came up within ceremony is that a lot of people were kind of transported back to a time with their families, with childhood, and actually childhood trauma, childhood neglect and abuse and sexual abuse was very kind of like prevalent within our sample. And yeah, it's a lot of kind of like speaking to that idea of going through a lot of trauma that puts you in this position where it's obviously quite dangerous kind of going on deployment and finding that connection with people and kind of dying alongside your comrades, and that sense of camaraderie was very high in our sample group working with the veterans here. So now we've kind of shifted. So we're still looking at PTSD, but we've also shifted to the study in the last amendment to look at childhood trauma also.
Mhm.
Can I ask a quick question about that? In that 10-day retreat, what was your protocol?
The protocol. Okay. So thank you. I got that. Yeah, so so there's initial screening for everyone, but the protocol is we look at baseline just before retreat. We'll look at just after, and then 3 months, 6 month, and 12 month.
Are you talking about the therapeutic protocol whilst they're on retreat, or the research?
I'm talking about what you administer and what wrapper you have around therapeutic support as well. So 10 days, I take it that's not 10 ceremonies, right? There's a preparation.
Yeah. So we don't actually offer anything. The research is classed as observational, so we're working with the site that's doing it. But basically, the format of the retreat is 5 ceremonies. So they'll do one diagnostic ceremony when they first arrive. They've got this 2-week preparatory period, then one ceremony, and then they'll do a purgative the next day. So there's other plants tied in with this as well. We're not actually just looking at ayahuasca. We're looking at an ayahuasca retreat in its kind of complete holistic framework that it's offered at the site where we work with. And then they'll have diagnostics one-to-one with the curandero, and the curandero will then offer them a tailor-made plant medicine prescription package that's unique to that individual. They will then do another ceremony and start their prescriptions. And alongside this, they'll do things called vapor baths, which are basically like a one person sauna where you sit above a pan and you inhale and swallow the steam from these medicinal plants. So there's a number of plant medicine kind of interventions or medicines, if you want to call it that, that accompany ayahuasca. But yeah, it's 5 ceremonies and a pretty intensive plant medicine treatment package.
And then beforehand as well, like Heroic Hearts will take control of all of the medical screening for everyone, helping everyone wean off their medications. And then there is also coaching that's provided before and after for preparation and integration in groups and one-on-one calls.
Thanks.
Cool. Yeah, please feel free to throw questions as we go along. I think if they come up. So yeah, looking at other kind of like psychometric domains as well. So this is kind of depression and anxiety. Again, kind of like seeing significant improvements in the scores. I'm just going to brush past these, Nigel. Looking a little bit close, I think like anxiety and depression is something that's really quite established now within the field. So it's just kind of like common to help look at it. One thing that I'm been quite interested in is also trauma-related conditions such as addiction and also impulsivity, levels of impulsivity, or kind of core traits of ADHD, which we see a lot in people with PTSD. So here we're looking at an improvement in drug craving, and also with their level of impulsivity. And yeah, like I said, we are waiting for the 6-month follow-up. So hopefully there's been some sustained change. Maybe not though. Let's see. Changes in EEG. So we also took EEG data in resting state with eyes open, eyes closed, 10 minutes each before and after, with the support of Casper, our neuro expert and support team. So mainly some of the changes that we are seeing is improvements in connectivity and also in more flexibility and kind of neuroplasticity. And we are seeing changes, especially in the area of the alpha band, which is mainly associated with the relaxed kind of wakefulness state. Seeing improvements within this as well, as we can see in the diagram there.
This is really great. May I just ask, how long before and how long after the ayahuasca ceremony do you collect the EEG?
So it's done when they first arrive to Iquitos. So there's a 2-day window before they go into the jungle and participate in their first ceremony. So it's done that weekend before, and then we do it immediately after they get out of the jungle, the day they get back. We try and do it as soon as possible. We have to allow a 24-hour window to let their baseline neurological activity settle. But we try and get it as soon as possible so that there's less variables that may disturb the data.
We've tried getting data in the jungle as well, and it's much harder. And the kind of like equipment that we'd need, and also just getting electricity and things like that. But yeah, the best we could do at this time is pre and post. I'm aware of time. Are we good on time? How long do we have?
I believe it's scheduled for an hour and a half, but there's meant to be a half-an-hour Q&A.
Okay. Well,
Is that right,
maybe we can.
If he's there.
Yeah, just leave enough time for questions. I mean,
Cool.
we end at 8:30, so
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
we've only got maybe 5 more slides left, so yeah, we should have plenty
Happy
of
to
time.
interweave it during the talk as well. Please just holler.
I had a quick question, if that's okay.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you have collected or would consider collecting sort of qualitative data as well. Might be quite interesting to hear about the sort of subjective experiences of the veterans.
Yeah, so we have been collecting qualitative data, and we have recently been working with Ros Watts in the connectedness the Watts is connectedness scale that she devised, and kind of came up with some semi-structured interview qualitative questions with her, and have a bunch of kind of like recordings with that at the moment. And interestingly, actually, I don't mind sharing that here. So we have recently been linking up with this kind of AI kind of company. They develop kind of AI models, which just makes life so much easier for us because, well, firstly, I'm more of a quantitative researcher, and just like transcribing and just like being able to do kind of subjective. Well, there's a big issue with subjectivity in qualitative research, and kind of we've been running a lot of these. We've been running these interviews, transcribing it through AI and being able to kind of like pull general patterns and ask it questions. We have just got the first round back like yesterday, so yeah, looking forward to just being able to ask it some questions and see if we can pull out some overarching themes.
Yeah, we do have, from an earlier study, we do have one qualitative publication, and then we've also got from the childhood trauma study, we've got about 60 hours worth of qualitative interviews that have been recorded. That was meant to be part of my doctoral program that hasn't actually been analysed yet, so there's scope to test this, but this was with in inverted commas a healthy sample group, not the veterans.
If anyone wants that, if anyone research minded wants to help out with research, feel free to like chuck us a CV.
Yeah, if you're a qualitative researcher, like there's some real in-depth data from that trauma study there. It's a lot of information to sift through. I don't know if you can use this AI tool to kind of streamline it, but it's very rich in data. And obviously you get a publication out of it if you want to. So yeah, just a quick overview of the current projects that we've got going on at the moment. So this is broken down into 3 primary categories. So we've got ongoing data collection with healthy participants. So this is anybody that signs up for an ayahuasca retreat at the Ayahuasca Foundation. They'll be optionally offered to participate in a psychometric study. So it's primarily quantitative. We have actually interlaced some qualitative elements into this ongoing study as well, but at the moment it's primarily psychometric quantitative stuff because it's just much easier to run that way when we're not there. So this is ongoing. We've been collecting data from this ever since the trauma study back in 2019, and we've kind of been refining it as it's gone on. Then, as we mentioned, we've got the PTSD study with the veterans. This is a collaboration with Heroic Hearts. Yeah, this is scaled up quick. I know we touched upon this, but initially we were anticipating 20 veterans per year with Heroic Hearts US. We've now got 3 other splinter factions of Heroic Hearts that have registered themselves as charities, and they've got waiting lists of veterans wanting to come down. So the project is looking like it's going to be 4 times bigger than what we'd anticipated. So we've been on quite a rapid scale up of recruiting research assistants and people that can help out with data analysis. So Onaya Science has grown pretty quickly over the last 2 years. And in the pipeline, which is kind of another splinter project on the Heroic Heart study, we've just partnered up with a former UFC fighter, a guy called Ian McCall. And we're going to be running a very similar project to the Heroic Hearts program with EEG. Well, the protocols are almost identical to the one we outlined with the veterans, but we're going to be looking at traumatic brain injury with athletes. So yeah, hopefully by the end of this year or start of next year, we should be sending cohorts of athletes down, people that have suffered concussions, other forms of brain trauma, or even just other physiological conditions that are requiring some kind of alternative healing, or have tried conventional treatments and haven't had much success. So yeah, we're very excited to get this one underway. We're hoping to shoot for MRI with this study as well, and we're currently fundraising for it at the moment. So yeah, this is the guy Ian McCall. So yeah, he's trained as a psychedelic coach, and he started off, I believe, just offering mushrooms to some of his clients, kind of underground, off the radar. And he then had spoken to the UFC about the therapeutic potential of particularly psilocybin, and they listened to him, and they funded some psychedelic research at Johns Hopkins. So I had seen an article about 5 years ago come out say that the UFC was funding some of these psilocybin studies. And I've always been interested in martial arts, and this just seemed like total fantasy that this was happening. So I reached out to one of the UFC commentators actually on Instagram, and he got back to me and put me in contact with this guy Ian, and it's kind of snowballed from there. So this has been in the pipeline for the last 2 years, and we're getting to the point where we're nearly ready to go with it. The protocol's almost set up. We've got the same core team that were involved in the Heroic Hearts project that'll be running this, and we're getting ready to submit ethics, and as I say, hopefully get this up and running in the next year.
Yeah. So we can't talk about ayahuasca research without considering the ethics and the ethical considerations. So towards the end there, I want to just kind of start to outline some of the things that is always on the forefront of our minds, and we would like to kind of bring questions to everyone as well. We don't necessarily have the answers to these questions, but so we do this research, and we feel it's important because there is stagnation in the treatments in the West and mental health and all of these things. And but really a question we always ask is kind of like, is it reciprocal? And then who benefits? And do these people in the jungle kind of need validation from us? And why are we kind of putting ourselves in this position where it's like, oh yeah, you need to be validated by Western science before you're a thing? I don't think they really care about that. And then, so what is our role within that then? And some organizations we always defer to, and really we like to kind of look at, who do a lot of work in the ethical spaces, for example, in Chacruna and also ICEERS. And so with the reciprocity, these are some of the organizations that we in the Onaya have been kind of affiliated with and kind of help out, doing more kind of conservation work in the jungle, for example. Next slide, please. And then, yeah, so some of the things that we're thinking about is kind of like this diluting of tradition. And as more demand comes through ayahuasca tourism, more and more of ayahuasca becomes like a business. It was quite, and is already the case. It was quite shocking when I first got to Iquitos, and by that time there was just like big flashing like lights with ayahuasca just like on these carts going down the street, and being like, oh man, like they know they know what their target audience is. And obviously you hear some very scary stories of malpractice and people being ripped off, and a lot of the safety concerns that just come with being in such a vulnerable space, which I believe PsyCares must be so familiar with. And being under these deep psychedelic spaces, you're kind of under the thing. The yeah. You're under threat by whoever's kind of guiding it if they have ill intent, and the intention of the person is one of the biggest kind of mediators of the therapeutic process. So this could be psychological abuse, financial abuse, sexual abuse, physical, and otherwise. And also thinking a lot about the kind of sustainability of these practices. So for example, there's a whole neo-shamanic kind of like world kind of opening up, and with the rates of deforestation that's going on, very sadly, the indigenous people are kind of losing their homes, especially from the Brazilian side. And now the practices are becoming more and more diluted over time, and how we can continue to uphold the practice of the traditional kind of way, because then really trust that these people are the experts, and they've spent such a long time kind of refining this process, and in a very kind of scientific way. Like one thing, when I went into the jungle, I was really thinking, I was expecting the whole thing to be a lot more kind of like woo, or like a bit more not really making much logical sense. But then obviously trial and error is a scientific method in and of itself, and is actually a very kind of well thought out process, very methodical, very procedural, and is there because it's survived the test of time because it works. So yeah, what can we do to uphold that? Can you to the next slide, please? So yeah, cultural appropriation is a big issue when we take things out of the Amazon and try to replicate that as the majority group, and kind of overriding a lot of the important considerations like spiritual and energetic considerations. And this has been done over history and over time, from taking land and oil and extracting rubber, and now taking knowledge and the immaterial. And I often find that I really like that question earlier about the qualitative side of psychedelic research, because though things that these people experience, they can be and they can be so abstract and so metaphysical and energetic, that our approaches are just very reductionist. Like, oh, they've scored less on these scales. What does that really mean? Probably not much, considering the way that the indigenous people work is often within these kind of spiritual energetic places, what they describe, and then what kind of the participants describe as well. We just don't really have the tools to be able to quantify that at the moment, even though we are trying our best to chuck as much of the technology as we can to it. So there's this risk of oversimplification. a lot of details being lost along the way. And then really just kind of accepting, really leveling out the different perspectives as well. We're not saying that the Western or the indigenous perspectives, which one's better and which one's worse, and kind of just both of these are valid points and, you know, deserve a platform and deserve to be voiced. Next slide, please.
Yeah, just quickly on this as well, you can imagine it's a bit of a minefield when it comes to balancing this, because there's one thing respecting the tradition, that clearly for the framework that these guys operate within, it's highly effective. But the urban jungle is very different to the Amazon jungle, and that people, Westerners coming in to participate in these traditional ceremonies, have got very different life concerns and different stresses, and they're returning back to, you know, the Western developed world after being in the jungle and being in the power of nature. This is kind of unprecedented, and nobody really knows how to navigate this. And there's a lot of people that are trying experimenting with their own techniques with it, potentially bastardizing the tradition, and in some aspects maybe improving it. But then, because of the history of the Amazon, it's a very controversial and prospectively riddled with issues when it comes to trying to change and evolve these practices.
Yeah, and I just want to say there's definitely there's lessons that could be learned both ways, right? Like the indigenous people do certain things amazingly, but then so do the West, and there's many parallels where these traditions or these different lenses and approaches could be married to make, like, to improve on what we know and make it more applicable also to a Western audience for the inevitable kind of medicalization of ayahuasca, which is, you know, already happening. And we're working on lab trials also in Melbourne as well, which is one of the first kind of like protocols taken inspirations from the dosing of how the indigenous people conduct the dosing. Simon's been kind of primarily leading on that.
I mean, that in itself as well, right? Just conducting scientific research into something that's so huge, really, to try and summarize and condense these experiences and this phenomenon down into scientific data it's a very, very difficult thing to do. But ultimately, you know, the randomized controlled trial format that is kind of the gold standard of scientific testing in the West is what's necessary to get anything heard within the scientific community.
Yeah, this kind of concept of the sacred, you know. So yeah, just leaving with some final thoughts. We, you know, what can we do? What can we do when doing this research? So, you know, we talk, you know, yeah, again, these are massive problems, and these are constantly kind of, you know, it's a very fragile kind of field, and there's loads of minefields everywhere. And then, you know, how can we do it respectfully? And if it's going to become mainstream, then all this tourism is happening, how can it be done in an ethical way? So for example, one of the things that we at Onaya do, we do our best to work alongside the indigenous kind of curanderos and the leaders, and the experts of the tradition and the practitioners. We have set up a board of indigenous advisors who essentially are people we speak to from the lineage to talk about what they would like us to focus our research on, and we kind of collaborate and think about how we can then translate that into science. So for example, the last study they were telling us about, you know, the importance of like focusing on the plants, and we published this paper on nature relatedness, and Don Rono was a co-author on that. It's not always that easy though. Sometimes it's like, you know, the impact of like immortal plant spirits or like babes, and then it's just like, I don't really know how to study that, but we'll try our best. And then also getting their input in how we kind of interpret that data and what we do with that data as well. So like really involving the indigenous voice within the research process, so it's not just a tokenistic thing. Translating the papers to Spanish, for example, so the people we do the research on can read the thing that we are writing. yeah, giving back to support the communities that we work with. But yeah, like I said, I don't have all of the answers, and these are just some examples of potential ways that we can help to well, we can we can think of to kind of support this work and move forward in an ethical way. So, and listening to the traditions and these experts. So yeah, thank you very
Thanks a lot.
much, everyone.
Yeah, I think that is it.
The
So
silence line.
yeah, there's the
Appreciate
website again if anyone wants to check out the more detailed information. And yeah, all of our research is conducted on a non-profit basis. We're not tied with any pharmaceutical companies or anything. We initially started out, me and Simon chucked some of our savings into the first study. Thankfully, we've had some pretty amazing support from firstly from the Medical Research Council, but then even more so from an organisation called the Grantown Foundation, who have pledged to support the whole of the veteran study. At least when we first pitched it, but now it's scaled up quite a bit. We're in a big fundraising drive at the moment. But yeah, it's a real pleasure to work in this area. So it's really amazing some of the things you see when transformations in people in such a short period of time. It's incredible. Yeah. Any questions? Feel free.
Thank you for listening.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nige and Weifeng. My connection is crap, so I don't have my video on, sorry. But yeah, guys, if you have any questions, you can either put them in the chat and I'll read them out, or raise your hand. I have a quick question just to start off while people are doing that. You kind of touched on it a little bit already, but there's obviously a limit. Sorry, there's obviously a limit to the number of people who can fly into the Amazon and take ayahuasca in its original setting. So what do you think the prospects are for taking ayahuasca out of the Amazon, potentially even growing it in other countries? Do you see that as a realistic, positive development, or is it more the case that we can just learn from these principles and apply it to our own systems of mental health care?
That's a big question. Yeah, I mean, it depends on a lot of factors. Like, obviously, the cultural heritage of the indigenous people of the Amazon needs to be protected and maintained. And if it spreads like wildfire and the production of ayahuasca doesn't meet the demand for it, then there's going to be issues. And Western society is renownedly destructive in this, I guess, colonial capacity to just totally pillage and take people's resources. So that alone is a big issue. On top of that, like, there's a lot of talk with the traditional practitioners, and this is a topic that probably, like, you could do a whole lecture on this. Like, it's huge. The traditional practitioners talk a lot about like the territories and basically being part of the ecosystem that you've grown up in. And using, so I would imagine in this kind of context, you'd use like local plants that have kind of similar effects to some degree. Maybe liberty caps would probably be like one of the closest things that you could use in the UK. But I think the key to it it's about really connecting you to like the divine, like the altered state of like transcendence and feeling the interconnectedness of the energy around you. And if that can be achieved through different methods, then I think that's probably a safer bet. Like even breath work and things like this probably would go some way. Go on, my phone.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, what you're describing is already kind of happening too, like essentially what ayahuasca is the MAOI and something that contains DMT, and DMT is pretty common in a lot of plants, and a lot of different cultures and countries already have their own versions of ayahuasca. For example, in Australia they use acacia, which contains high DMT, and then they mix it with the Syrian rue. And in China, I know that there are people running ceremonies that use like the Chinese version of the ayahuasca vine. Yeah, in answer though, I really think like a big part of the work that we do would be a lot to do with learning from the tradition and really highlighting the respect for nature and actually recognizing that, you know, we don't have to fly everyone out in terms of accessibility, and that's not our goal, like and implementing it into like Western practice or anything like that. And I think one thing that we really learned from the traditions is that nature always provides you exactly what you need where you are. And I think that's a big reason why, you know, for example, why psilocybin research has kind of picked up so much, because it's such a global kind of phenomenon as well, kind of like growing of psilocybin mushrooms. And we did think like if it ever, you know, and it's just the whole process of it, like going into a Western paradigm would just be such a headache, isn't it? Like it's like an 8-9 hour thing. And like even within like a 9 to 5 structure, it would just, if it was to come into like say the NHS or something, we did think, maybe it could as like an alternative treatment, like acupuncture or something, where there's some sort of regulation board and there's some practitioners on the side, but it's like to be like a prescribe you like an ayahuasca ceremony. That's much less likely compared to some of the other kind of psychedelics in research right now. Nonetheless, the level of the traditional practice and the research that's gone into the culture and the ceremony and the ritual and the preparation and integration that the people in the jungle have is so applicable and generalizable to all of these other psychedelic kind of practices as well. So that's one big part of that kind of marrying of traditions, I think.
Yeah, because people are already doing, you might go on a psilocybin retreat or some other mixed psychedelic retreat over here, which might take a weekend, or in terms of finances, these things, in the long run, these things are going to be more economic, even if it includes things like 10-hour ceremonies. It's just that is changing. Big part of that is changing the paradigm view, isn't it, within our Western approach to medicine, the medical model thing. And that's because people are already using these different substances over here, aren't they?
Definitely.
Yeah,
So I'm sure
it's going to be very interesting to see how this unfolds. I mean, PTSD, which is renownedly hard to treat, if we keep collecting data that's showing these kind of results, like effectively like 100% efficacy rate, which is just like totally unheard of when it comes to PTSD treatments, right? Like, it's definitely going to cause some ripples within the scientific community. I mean, it takes a long, long time for a medical paradigm to change. Like, it's going to require a lot of unpicking, and this entire format is so different to what it is that we offer. Like, a lot of this is about going into the discomfort. Like, it's not meant to be like minimizing the uncomfortable elements of it. It's like you've got to face the demons head on. Obviously, the ceremonies typically involve like purging and physical discomfort as well. Like, there's not really anything within our medical framework that like does that kind of thing. So I think there's also going to be a reluctance from the public to kind of reprogram that in the mind. So yeah.
The other thing on this is just now I'm thinking about it. Yesterday there was some quite big news out of the States.
Yes.
From a church using ayahuasca, and they just reached a agreement with the US authorities where they have now permission to use ayahuasca as a church sacrament. So that could be a completely different use from it, completely outside the medical model. So that's really quite
in the long run,
great
that's probably going to be the way it goes. Like, I think there's probably going to be this medical acceptance over the next, like, hypothetically say 10 years. And then I think as a result of these experiences and it becoming a bit more accepted, then it's going to be interesting again, because it might start making people start thinking about spirituality more than science.
I mean, like with these syncretic churches and from Brazil, like the UDV and Santo Damian, I think it's like the Church of the Eagle or something. That got the legal. Yeah, thank you for saying that. And yeah, that could be one potential way of integrating it. Also, like using different versions of ayahuasca. Like, I know that within church uses, it tends to be much lower dose, for example, and not using as much of the tannins and the kind of purgative effects. So people are, not kind of getting as nauseous kind of when doing it in the church kind of base setting, and or even like thinking about to the spectrum of like microdosing it as well. So who knows?
I'm not sure that's what Joe's going to be. So Joe Tafur, he's the guy who's just got the license to do this. He's a half Colombian, half American medical doctor. He's written a book about this actually called The Fellowship of the River. I'll put it in the chat as well. It's really, really interesting book. But he was running a retreat center in Iquitos for like the last 7 or 8 years. So he's been doing high dose sessions with people. And now that this precedent's set, he effectively has got the legal right in the US to do that. So it's, yeah, I don't know what his plans are, but I would imagine it's probably going to be closer to the pretty intensive healing retreats that he's been doing down there.
The Church of the Eagle and the Condor. That's so cool.
It's pretty badass.
That's the best.
The Santo Daime Church already, they've carried on, and there was a legal challenge to them, wasn't there, in the UK a few years ago, and it was dropped because the prosecutors, they couldn't really mount a prosecution, so they're carrying on, and I mean, they do relatively low dose, and I mean, I was chatting to someone who's involved in that recently, and he said he'd lost count of how many ceremonies he'd done at 800.
Wow.
So
that's
they're cracking on
from people. Yeah, and like every 2 weeks or something like. Yeah. Well, and the longitudinal data actually looks really good from those initial studies. Yeah.
I think Agatha was going to say something.
Yeah, thank you so much. I've been trying to jump in for a while, but I can't find how to raise my hand. I don't have the option today. I want to ask a very, very practical question that I hope you can help me with. I've worked with trauma-informed somatic work for a while, and I really appreciate the potential of psychedelic therapies in a number of ways. I'm training to be a counselor, and my aim, I guess, is to educate myself and become as informed as I possibly can whilst I'm learning this, because I do see a time, actually I'm already seeing it, even though there isn't a legal way of doing it in the UK. People will go out and they will get peak experiences. They will get knocked off their feet in Holland, Peru, in all kinds of conditions, not necessarily always as well contained as the place that you guys research. And they will come back. And from what I know from anecdotally and experientially is just how much preparation and integration is a complete game changer. It basically defines the longevity of your experience and the depth of the transformation. So I'm currently tunnel vision and trying to accumulate as much materials and knowledge and direction in learning as much as I can about the preparation and integration, because I think people will always go and find their peak experience, whether it's safe or not, but it's the integration, particularly in the Western society, jumping on a plane, coming back, then trying to reconcile the jungle experience with our very different lives. So that's the area that really draws me in. And I see that really opening up, and I see a demand and a need for that in the future as this becomes bigger. So I wanted to ask both of you, and I ask every person whose talk I go to, what is the thing that you would recommend I need to go and sniff out and study and focus on? What is your recommendation from what you've seen?
Well, Joe, I know what it is. This is a great.
Cracking the knuckles.
Yeah. I don't know if I said it too much, but I think it's a good one. But so Onaya Science is like the not-for-profit kind of side of the research, but Onaya kind of actually has a separate side also, which kind of like provide prep and integration support and courses for both. There's an online course that people can do and learn. It's like an 8-week course, and then there's like a 16-week course for practitioners as well, which is kind of like certified and accredited. So that's one thing we would recommend, because we also see this issue, and we went and designed this thing, and we're just kind of like piloting the first cohort. I just had my first session today, so it's like a 16-week kind of module thing. And thank you for sharing. Yeah, on that link you'll find. Yeah, so it's like a one-stop shop for not just the preparation, integration, but also ceremonial navigation, which includes a bunch of videos, like online learning materials. And then for the face-to-face one, there's like a CPD thing that you can do if you're interested.
So yeah, this is all about the intersection between like traditional practices and like modern mental health treatments. And we came from a conventional medicine background, and we saw these gaps, and then we spoke to the traditional practitioners, and we learned a lot from them. And this is an amalgamation of the two paradigms.
Yeah. So yeah, Onaya Health is like the clinical side.
I had another quick question. I was really curious about what you were saying about the shamans and how they come from a lineage. And I think you mentioned you're working with the lineage of three brothers. I was just wondering about what the indigenous community's sort of view of like what constitutes a shaman is. Is there a genetic predisposition or a genetic like sort of like a gene that you need to be a shaman, or is it more the training? And what are your views on it based on what you've seen?
I mean, they're kind of community appointed. So quite often, someone who would originally become a curandero would be someone that knows the plants, has got quite a good connection with the plants, and then has often been through some period of turmoil and has come through the other side. They call this like, shamanic rites of passage, the wounded healer concept, like that's often kind of seen in traditional practitioners. And then they will be typically become like an apprentice. So if someone's going through this kind of dark period and they see the community sees potential in them, they'll work with a curandero and they'll train up and they'll start dieting plants. A lot of the paradigm is based around this concept of dieting. So like going into isolation on your own, stripping back on a lot of the things you're consuming apart from like one particular plant. And if you train to become a curandero, there's specific plants you can diet to kind of hone these diagnostic capacities. I was talking about being able to read into people's like energy field and whatnot. There's certain things that you can do to kind of hone those abilities. So like anyone can kind of apprentice as a curandero, but I think some people have got a natural knack, and a lot of it depends on things that happen through their development, and then it seemingly gets passed on through generations. If someone's then got a child and brings them up teaching about the plants, that person's got a higher likelihood of becoming a curandero too.
Oh, I think we're pretty much out of time. Someone's just asked in the chat how they can get in contact with Anaya. So there's some email addresses on there. Also, any social media. We're going to be starting a newsletter as well. So maybe if you want to be on that newsletter, you can just put your email on the chat or to me. And putting you on the spot here, but I wondered if either or both of you, Nigel, Waifeng, would want to sing an icaro to finish the meeting.
I don't want to share.
Go on, Waifeng. You go for it, man.
Yeah, just something to close it off. Before that, I just wanted to kind of highlight big ups Ali on the chat there, kind of like really, really great brother who came out with us in the jungle last time. And also I saw my mum. Hello, mum.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah, it's just an Icaro to close off this talk. Thank you so much. Feel free to pop off now if you'd like. This will take maybe like a minute or two.
Don't do that. Stay for it.
Okay, stay. Just to let you know, practically at the end, there's a sound that the indigenous people make when they kind of seal off an intention and send it to the spirit world, and they make a sound like this. And it's like, and that will mark the end of the Icaro. And yeah, it's something I've been learning in the last few years, the Shipibo. Get comfortable in your seats. Keep your eyes closed or open, whatever you like. And just, yeah, it's a blessing for you. Mơ tô hô ê ai yong shô mơ tô hi shô ba no kin nơ ska ja ni cơ no sha wan an ni bo 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 no ma bo bi skin, chitty shaman, jo shaman, no mato isho no mato isho no mato isho no mato isho no. Muchas
Yes,
gracias.
yes. Good shout.
Gracias. And thank you everyone so much for coming. We really appreciate it. Thank you, Nige and Wai Feng, for your time. Have a beautiful evening, a beautiful spring and summer when it comes. And yeah, we'd love to hear from you and stay in touch.
Hopefully catch some of you guys at some of the festivals too. Adios.
Adios. Gracias.
You.